Welcome to Messy Liberation, the podcast that dives deep into feminism, business, and personal growth. I'm Becky Mollenkamp.
And I'm Taina Brown. Get ready for another messy conversation through the eyes of two intersectional feminist coaches.
Let's get messy.
Hi, Becky. Hi, Taina.
This is Jordan Maney, Breast Lab. Before you introduce, I just wanted to say
our good friend, Jordan Maney.
Who was a little tardy in arrival because you were doing what?
I was resting. A little too hardcore.
You rested too close to the sun.
I did. Too on the nose.
But it's so perfect. Funny. What a better reason to be late for our discussion about rest than because you're resting. So that's great. Well, tell the people who you are, Jordan.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jordan Maney, aka the Radical Joy Coach, and I help people who I call Bleeding Hearts, aka people who give a damn, center rest, joy, and care in their life.
You're here. You don't look like you just woke up, but maybe that's because you got that extra rest. You look well rested.
You know, this is not SpawnCon, but I know it's so dumb because it's literally naive backwards, that Avion water spray. I put that on and then I quick moisturize it really quickly. So I just I look a little, irked up.
I'm feeling cool. I didn't know what SpawnCon was. Sponsored content. I got it now. I'm not hip to the SpawnCon lingo. But anyway, well, we're glad you're here. We're going to talk about rest. And you just sent out a podcast episode / Substack post, which we'll link to your Substack in the show notes, about rest so you can rage. I think that was So Taina and I both listened to that last night in preparation of this. And it just feels like a really great place for us at least to start, because I don't know, I assume that everyone listening and both of you are fucking raging all the time. I feel like I am constantly having to, in a way, resist my rage, but then also leaning to it in the places where it makes sense and all that. But the world is a shit show, and I think is making most of us filled with fury and anger and frustration and all the feelings. So talk to me about why rest matters for those of us who are raging.
So in that podcast episode, I watched this interview. Have you ever watched an interview before where you're just kind of like, oh my God, this is going to change me? I watched this interview with Myrlie Evers Williams, the surviving widow of Medgar Evers, who was horrifically assassinated in their driveway in 1963. And Gayle King asked her, have you ever wanted revenge? Did you ever want revenge for what was taken from you, how this traumatized you and your kids? And she said, yes, I wanted revenge by doing well. And I was like, hold on. And she continues to talk about, her legacy and all the ways that she focused her energy, her rage into her work. And I think, especially when I talk to baby community organizers, newbie activists, folks who are just getting into perhaps protesting or showing up in those types of ways, anger is a really great initiator. And the way that I will draw the line between anger and rage is something that actually can be sustained. Anger is not. You run out of that real quick. And so I don't think it is a bad thing if it helps you initiate getting involved at a community level, whether that's volunteering, whether that's organizing, whether that's going to a protest, whatever that looks like. But I do think what ends up happening is people have so much valid anger that they let that lead and try and let that be the thing that sustains them. And then they don't take care of themselves. And then their body starts to break down, or their mind starts to break down, or they're just so focused on doing so much that they're not really effective. And Rest So You Can Rage came to me, I think that was last year, where I was thinking about rest. The whole reason why I do this work, rest, care, and joy, is because those things help us navigate the rage, help us navigate the grief, help us navigate the really yucky, icky, uncomfortable feelings. And they're necessary to be able to sustain any type of change, any type of advocacy. And so Rest So You Can Rage is really about take care of yourself so you can continue to do this work. Channel all of that anger into something that you can sustain, into a role that you can sustain, for a long time, for your lifetime. There are a lot of people who are like, who want to do it for a longer period of time, but they approach it from that kind of like, I'm mad as hell. I'm showing up to this thing. And I'm sure y'all can relate. I'm sure listeners can relate. There has been at least one protest or action that you've gone to, and like anger was the thing that got you there, that initiated you getting there. And then it was over, and you were like, okay, so now what? What am I supposed to do now? And I'll use a cute little not anecdote, but like a little snippet. There's a Black Lives Matter protest here locally in San Antonio some years ago. And the group, they're trying to take down this Confederate statue in this park. Our city council, for the most part, is pretty progressive, and they were already going to take it down, but you know, they had to go through the process of doing that. So the guy who led the like Black Lives Matter side of the park and protest, he was like, we're gonna take it to the streets. We were like, okay. So we like, go to the streets, we get the picture, all of that, and then we all go back to that side of the park. And he sits down and he like eats a granola bar and drinks a Capri Sun. And we're like looking at him like, what are we supposed to do next? And he's like, chill for a second, like eat a snack, hydrate, like take a break. And I remember that pissed me off so bad in the moment, because I was like, no, we need to be doing, XYZ, have our list and all that. And he was like, you can take a break. You need to do that. So Rest So You Can Reach is really about how can you take rest, care, joy, and use those things to go from anger to rage and sustain that work over your lifetime.
Yeah. I love that. It brings to mind, several conversations that I've had with my therapist about anger, about being angry about certain things. But it also brings to mind, have you read Uses of Anger by Audre Lorde?
No. Oh, love Audre Lorde. I
You
need
have to
to.
read it. You have to read it. So, the one thing that my therapist and I talk a lot about in terms of anger is like anger is typically a masking emotion. Like it's a secondary response to an initial feeling.
Mhm.
And because we jump to anger, we're so used to jumping to anger so quickly. Sometimes we don't know what that primary emotion is, right? And so there's work that needs to be done to kind of uncover the root of what we're feeling that's making us angry, right? So sometimes it's grief, sometimes it's betrayal, loss, sometimes it's, whatever it might be. But I think one of the things that like really that I try to focus on a lot with when it comes to any kind of emotion is that like it's all information,
I love that.
right? Like our feelings are information. They're our body's way, our mind's way of like telling us that like something outside of like baseline is happening and it's affecting us in a certain way. And so if you're angry about something, then that's an indication that you need to pause, right? To figure out what is this external or internal thing that's happening that my body is sending these like signals to my brain to make me angry about, like, what do I need to know right now in order to be able to move forward. And I think because we live in such a culture of just like move, 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 whether it's anger or happiness, right? Quote unquote, good or bad emotions, right? And I don't like labeling emotions as good or bad because they're all information, right? And so I think when we label them as good or bad, then we assign these moral judgments to our feelings. And so when we have bad emotions, then we feel bad about having bad emotions. And then guilt creeps in, which then also masks the anger, which then also masks the original emotion, right? Which makes it harder to figure out what's really happening. But without having that time to like pause to figure out what's really happening so you can decide how you want to move forward, like we're just storing up all these feelings and eventually they do bubble over, right? And this is why people have outbursts. I mean, I have angry outbursts all the time because I'm still in my 40s, still not used to taking that time to pause. And I think what you're saying about like having that time to rest, that's part of that process, right? Of like making sure that you are pausing, that you're giving your body and your mind time to like slow down so you can tap into that information and understand like what's happening for you and what's the appropriate action to take. In uses of anger, Audre Lorde talks about how like anger, oh God, there's a specific quote. I just wrote about it in my newsletter last week. So I'm so glad that we're having this conversation.
When you were talking about that, it made me think about the emotions wheel and how like anger, like
Yes,
you
I
were
was thinking about
saying,
it too.
could be like a bunch of different things. And I was talking to a friend earlier this week about it actually, and how I think I'm like a preacher's kid. So like growing up Black and Baptist and a girl, I wouldn't even I didn't even know until like maybe 5 years ago when I would say like, "Oh, I feel blocked." Oh, I was angry. I got so good at, like, swallowing anger. I'm just like, "Oh, no, that's not, because I can't feel that. I'm supposed to be, like, happy and chipper and grateful and focus on the good, like, all the time," that, like, negative emotions are something that, like, a man can express, but, like, I don't. And that was never overtly sad. It was just so underlying, but,
Well, I think that was powerful too, Patina, because I think about the times when I do get angry, and so often it's usually I'm actually disappointed or embarrassed, and anger shows up instead because that emotion feels a little easier in some ways, even though in the same way most women, I think, we were not given anger, we weren't allowed to have anger, but in some ways that feels easier because it feels external. Like my anger, I'm going to have this anger and shoot it out at someone versus dealing with my own disappointment or my own embarrassment. So I think it's interesting you mentioned that. Did you find it, Taina?
I did. I did. So she talks about how there's one specific line where she says anger is loaded with information and energy.
mm,
And then at the beginning of the piece, and this is actually a speech that she gave at like the National Women's Studies Association conference. And she's talking specifically about how women respond to racism. And, you know, Audre Lorde, Black lesbian. This was, I think, in the 70s, maybe late 70s or early 80s, 1981 in Connecticut. And so she's this Black lesbian woman invited to speak to what I'm assuming is a majority white audience, right? Given the time and also given the context of what she says in her speech. But there's this one paragraph, I'm just going to read it really quickly or try to paraphrase it, where she says, "My anger is a response to racist attitudes and the actions and presumptions that arise out of those attitudes." And then she says, "My anger and your attendant fears about that anger are spotlights that can be used for growth in the same way that I have used learning to express anger for my growth, but for corrective surgery, not for guilt. Guilt and defensiveness are bricks in a wall against which we all flounder, and they serve none of our futures." And so she's talking specifically about how if you feel guilty about your anger, or if someone responds to your anger with defensiveness, right? It's like, well, why are you angry? Why can't you say that nicer, even though you're calling out racism, right? Which is a conversation that we see happen all the time. You know, when someone is the one who's doing the calling out, other people tend to try to police how that calling out happens. Right. And she's addressing that specifically, you know, and she goes on to like list specific examples of that. Like she literally says, "So I can put your mind at ease, I'm going to give you some examples of how this has happened in the past." Right. And so, and just thinking about, you know, this idea of just like feeling guilty about your anger or people being defensive against your anger when it's a type of righteous anger, right? Like obviously we're not talking about like fly off the handle, like violent kind of anger that is just a trigger response or a trauma response
Yeah,
to,
we're
you know,
talking about rage against your rights being
right,
systemically stripped from us.
right,
Yes, yes, yes.
right, right. We're not talking about like physical anger. We're talking about, you know, just like being righteously angry about things that are wrong in the world. When people get defensive about that, right? Like it's also a spotlight for that also in that situation, not just for the thing that you're angry about, right? Like it's a way to know where that person is in their journey towards figuring out how to navigate oppressive systems, you know? And like, I think this is really important because sometimes people who, the bleeding hearts, right? That
Mm-hmm.
you probably work with a lot. But even in day-to-day situations, right? Whether it's with family or friends or even at work, right? Like if you notice something and you call it out and someone gets defensive about how you call that out, or just the simple fact that you are calling it out, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's information for you to know, like whether or not you need to be aligning yourself with this person, right? Like where this person is on their journey so that you can better navigate your relationship with them, right? Like, because to me, it's like if I'm at work and something problematic happens and I like call it out and someone is like, oh, yeah, that just happens all the time. You know, it's just, it is what it is. And I'm just like, okay, you're not my ally.
Nope.
Like, I clearly can't trust you to talk about these things and to be able to step in if something were to happen, right? And so having like approaching those kinds of situations, approaching those feelings and those scenarios in that way
Mm-hmm.
is really important for people who are doing activist work or who are trying to be like the person in the office or the person in the friend group or in the family who is like the one who is like trying to call attention to the problematic ways in which relationships and systems sometimes, or not sometimes, but all the time, right, operate. Yeah.
When you were talking about that, it made me think of the when you said guilt and what was the other one? Our bricks.
Defensiveness.
Defensiveness. I'm thinking about this color wheel. I think defensiveness. I think a lot of like guilty type ways that people will position themselves when, you call out racism or sexism or homophobia or transphobia. I think of that initial defensiveness, a lot of that is wrapped up in shame. And it's interesting to see that reaction from because it gets, what is it? Oh God, there's a quote. It'll come to me later. But it's interesting to see how people, instead of being like, oh my gosh, thank you for checking me, I did not know that what I said or did made you feel uncomfortable or a slight against a community. I didn't intend for that, like that type of thing. People go into like, you don't know me. My best friend is blah, 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 blah. I would never. And like, where is that coming from? And also when you are the person who is being policed with shame, like the reaction to that can be that anger, can be that rage. So it feels like it's shame, like it's two sides, perhaps of the same coin. And how the reactions are like. I think it was Katya, one of my favorite drag queens, that talked about in sexual interactions with maybe men who are like not out after it's like after the deed is done, so to speak, watching when they were worked as a sex worker, like watching the ones whose shame would rise up real quick because that's when the danger happens. And just seeing how like that is such like shame is so intrinsic to oppression. It's so necessary to continue to oppress people. If you make people feel ashamed for their bodies, if you make people feel ashamed for the way that they look, if you make people feel ashamed for where they come from, like, and you really, really put that in people, you'll continue to police yourself. So it's just interesting when you're saying that, just that idea of how we learn to react or act with shame based off of like kind of where we are. But yeah, I love that. I
Well,
love Audre Lorde.
as the white lady in the room, I will say I know the defensiveness thing real, real well because it used to be my MO back in the day when I was not a safe person for someone to be around because I was practicing good white feminism without really understanding intersectionality, without really having done any real work beyond
Mhm,
being the kind of person who's like, why can't we all just get along? And I love
mhm.
everybody no matter the color and all that kind of stuff, right? Which
Yeah.
still very much is rampant and exists. And I think you're 100% right, Jordan. It's shame. It's shame. It is fear and shame when
Mhm,
you are in that place of defensiveness of, well, but you don't know me and it's not me because you're just putting it all back on this self and not being able to see, not being able to step outside of yourself to say, this isn't even about me. This is about systems. This is about the issues and my part inside of that. But me acknowledging those things isn't the same as saying I am bad. But because we live in such this individualistic world, everything is about me, right? And so
Yeah.
I can't hear you talk about these issues without it being, if you're talking about white people,
Mhm.
I'm hearing you, Becky, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You, Becky. And so then my response to that is like the shame starts to come up, the fear of being misunderstood, the shame of someone
Mhm.
thinking I am bad. I've done bad
Mhm.
things. I am bad. And so my response to that, like, whenever we're in a shame place, we often grab what is a tool we know. And one that we learn, at least as white people, is defensiveness and like this,
Yeah.
"Oh, no, you're wrong," like gaslighting, all that stuff, because we're trying to shield ourselves from that horrible,
Mhm.
because shame is the most, like, I'm a big fan too, Taina, of all emotions are valid. And I think all of them actually serve a really good purpose. Shame is one of the only emotions that I say doesn't really serve a good purpose. Like, there can be little places for shaming, right? But not in the way that we think of shame, I don't think. I think it's more of embarrassing, can sometimes maybe be like, I'm going to embarrass you for your bad behavior. But shame is about like me as a person, not what I've done. And I just don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's a good space to be in. And so when you're feeling that, you're doing anything to get out of it. So I know that feeling so well as someone who used to like occupy it a lot. I would be like, not all white people, right? I would be that person. Not me.
Yeah.
I'm not like that. That need for the exceptionalism, because it allows me to not feel shameful.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
such a
think
great
that
point.
Yeah.
I think the interesting thing though is like obviously we don't know unless you have like an intimate relationship with someone, like an incredibly intimate relationship. You're not really going to know someone like fully. And
Mhm.
even in intimate relationships, like I mean, my wife and I have been together both unmarried and married for a little over 11 years now, and I still feel like there are things about her that just puzzle me. I'm just like, what? Like, who are you again?
We don't know
But
anyone but ourselves, really.
Mhm.
right, right. We can never really fully know anyone but ourselves. But I think even in those moments where people do get defensive, whether it's because of shame or not, like I think I just recall so many instances where I have someone has responded to me, right? Usually lighter skinned person, usually white, right? Or like a white Latino or something. And I know that it's coming from that place of like, well, you don't know me. And I'm like, but you just showed me part of yourself. Like you just showed me a little bit of who you are by how you responded to me, right? By what you said or by your body language or your facial expression. And so there are these like little ways that we show the world who we are by how we respond to situations and circumstances. And it's like, sure, that may not be the fullness of who you are. And I get it. Like there are times where I have like what most people would call like gut reactions. It's like your go-to, right? That's how you respond or react before you have a chance to think about what actually happened and what you really want to say or what you really want to do. But the thing is that, like, those things, those reactions are so intrinsically tied to who we are. Those reactions form out of habit, and habit comes from a place of doing the same thing over and over again because of who you are, because of the things that you believe, because of the way that you feel like you should be responding, or the way that you feel like is necessary for you to respond to other people and the world around you. And so, I feel like this conversation is getting like really meta and like really philosophical and deep. Um, but yeah, I have like just one example that just keeps coming to mind, which I won't really get into because of time and it's just unnecessary. But I think if we want to show the world, right, like the best parts of who we are, then it's important to take that time to rest, to
Mhm.
understand how we're feeling.
I was
I
gonna
wanted
say
to
is,
oh, go ahead. Go,
can
Becky.
I just quickly one more,
Yeah.
just as the person on the room who is like not like the others, right? Like one of these things is not like the other. I just wanted to say, as you're talking about these things, and me having talked about that defensiveness, what comes on the other side of that then is I'm basically taking my shame and putting it onto you, right? Like
Mhm.
I'm throwing it on you. I can't deal with this
Mhm.
shame. Well, I'm gonna make you deal with it
Mhm.
instead, right? And because I have that privilege to be able to do that, then you're in that position. And all I can say is that as I'm hearing you two talk about these things, I'm thinking, I feel so heavy. Like it just feels
Mhm.
so heavy. What a weight. And all of these interactions, the additional work. And again, this is where misogynoir is so important. And white women have got to understand and learn these things because, yeah, I deal with my interactions with men and all of the weight that comes up with that. And I get that. And that is real. And I don't also have to have every interaction in my life be filtered through this, like, what is that? What did that glance mean? What did that shift of the head mean? What did that, like, as you're describing that, it's like literally every interaction, you don't get a safe space other than with other Black women to be able to be like, okay, I can breathe here and know that I'm safe. Like, I get to have that when I'm with you. You don't get to have that when you're with me. And what a heaviness that is, which brings us to, so Jordan, talk about rest as resistance, Trisha Hersey, which you mentioned in that episode, and why that's so important for Black women.
Okay, even when you said you don't get safe spaces unless it's with other Black women, I was like, and then you do have some Black women who are homophobic and transphobic, and you have some Black. So
Absolutely.
like it's you're constantly like sussing out space. And one thing that's still relevant and to the point that I'm trying to make with rest as resistance to what y'all were saying earlier, when I dipped my toe into DEI, like really dipped my toe, and then I was like, oh, that's not the first step. I had this program called White People Rehab. I love that name so much. I will die on that hill. That was such a fun name. But I noticed that I had a lot of hashtag well-meaning white women in the group, and getting over that initial, like, when you are called in or called up or called out, the translation isn't this was done or said and I need you to make amends for it. The translation was I'm a bad girl. I'm a bad girl. And like you said, you want to take the shame, you feel the shame come onto you. It's not being thrown onto you, but we live in a very punitive world. We don't have like restorative justice. We don't really even have justice in this country, child. We have accountability from a punitive lens. I remember growing up, and this was never in churches where my dad preached, but other churches, especially when I was in college that I went to, where people would stand up horrifically, like if they were teens and they had sex, or somebody got pregnant, they would like stand up, and the accountability felt more like a stoning than it felt like, dang, that's not really in line with what we do here, but I love you and we got your back type thing. So a lot of times when we feel called out, when we feel exposed, when we feel singled out, when someone says you did something, we hear I'm a bad girl. And that's the worst thing growing when you're socialized in patriarchy. That's the worst thing, to be told that you're a bad girl, because bad girls get treated worse. And so I think sometimes, like,
because they deserve it.
Because they deserve it, right? So sometimes it's like, oh no, I don't want the bad thing to happen to me. So it's like a push. I'm gonna push that shame back onto you. It's your fault. Like, I didn't have anything to do with it. And that's such a very interesting, like, defense mechanism, because in that way, one, you never have to feel. And two, you never have to acknowledge that there are parts of yourself that you didn't see. Because Taina, you said like, oh, you can never really know anybody. I think you said you can never really know anybody other than yourself. And then I wanted to say, and a lot of times we don't even fully know ourselves. Right? I was telling this to a friend. I was like, self-perception is so incomplete, because you can think of yourself of like as one way, and then someone else gets another angle of you, somebody else, a friend gets this, a partner gets this, a coworker gets this. Those are all still sides of you. And the reason why, I think I did White People Rehab for about 6 months, and I was like, we're not getting through this first hump. Like, people are not able to absorb like this first part because they don't know how to be in their bodies. They do not know how to sit with an emotion. They do not know how to sit with thoughts that are not fun sometimes. They know how to keep it moving, but in such a way where they're ignoring a whole other aspects of themselves, which is like the connection between your mind and your body and your spirit. And so for me, when we talk about like rest as resistance, and when we even look at resistance movements historically, especially Black resistance movements historically, there has always been an element of connecting to something outside of yourself, something bigger than yourself. Civil rights movement, heavily influenced by the Black church, right? Not saying that's what we need here right now, but Juneteenth started with a hoodoo ritual. The Haitian Revolution started with a voodoo ritual. I'm not saying, again, I'm not trying to prescribe to any one belief system or something, but sometimes that belief is just believing in a future. Sometimes that connecting to something outside bigger than yourself is connecting to humanity. And I often feel like rest is one of those ways where we recognize our own limitations and our own mortality. And it's an opportunity and a space to pause so that we can refuel, so that we can get some perspective, so we can review, so we can reassess, so we can reevaluate, so we can check in with ourselves and be like, yo, are you good? Are you feeling okay there, buddy? You're kind of acting up. Is everything okay? And the bigger part of rest as resistance is that when you really allow yourself to even imagine, maybe you're in a position where you can't fully yet, but to even imagine like rest for yourself, you also recognize that like the idea of doing this alone is a lie.
Yeah.
There's no resistance that's like, oh my God, it's all on me. And we're still in that headspace in the United States right now. Of like, it's just going to be a bunch of rugged individualism and there's no collective like action thought.
Yeah.
There's no like, how do I, in telling people who are in that space very similarly of, you called me out and I have to throw this back onto you, who are in that space of like, oh, I just woke up and I'm ready to go do some stuff. And it's like, hold up, hold up, hold up, hold up, hold up. Do you even know where you're going? Do you even know? I saw this. I don't want to say it's adorable, but I saw this with some of the No Kings protests where, people who'd never organized before were making websites with little registration tabs. Put your name and your address and your email.
No.
Baby, what are you doing?
That's dangerous.
That's so dangerous. That's not how, that's not it. But like you go into like, I have to act. So you go into like efficiency mindset. And what you need to go into is slower and in a lot of ways more annoying because we want to have a quick solution, especially here. We always want to have a quick solution, especially when things are as scary as they are.
Yeah.
How do we fix this quickly versus how do we actually fix this?
Yeah.
Because quick solutions, that's duct tape.
Go ahead, Becky. Well, it feels like a white response in that it suddenly feels urgent to white people.
What's that? What's that, like, JG Whitworth? It's my money and I want it now. It's my country and I want it now. Like I want it fixed right now.
Yeah. It's like, I think people,
it's because it's finally affecting white people. And so now they're like, oh, this is urgent, but this is hundreds. This is centuries.
Been going on longer than your social security check.
Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes people mistake efficiency for simplicity, right? And I think
so true.
I know I do that all the time. I'm like, well, what's the most efficient way to do that? Because that'll be the easiest, but that's not always the simplest, most like sustainable way to move. Oh, I was going to say, like, I'm so glad you brought up this connection between the mind and the body, because I think when it comes to understanding your rage, understanding your anger and any kind of emotion, like we grow up, like we live in a society that is so mind-body detached.
So mind-body detached. Oh my God.
It's that whole premise of like, I think, therefore I am, right? This like elevation, almost worship of like rationality, of like logic, of like being in your mind and thinking through things instead of feeling your way through things. And not that those two things are in opposition to each other. Like those two things work in tandem. And I think that's what we get wrong, right? Like we live in a culture where it has to be one or the other, as opposed to, well, how do these two things interact with each other? And it's one of the reasons why like I started looking for like somatic, training, because I was seeing, well, for me, like I have a big mind body detachment myself, right?
Yeah.
But I was also noticing like with a lot of like clients that I'm working with, like there is a sense of mind body detachment because we grow up in this culture where it's like, no, you're supposed to think your way through things, and feeling your way through things feels dangerous. It feels unsafe, right? Because we're so not used to feeling our way through things. We're so not used to understanding where our feelings are coming from, how to manage those feelings, and then how to think about those feelings, right? And so this premise of like that rugged individualism that you were talking about, right? Like that, it's all tied up in that as well, right? Like if you If you can think your way through it, then you don't need anybody else because it's just your mind that's doing the work.
Which is just so crazy to say out loud because like this is impacting so many more people than just like one person.
Yeah.
But people approach it from that way of like, okay, well, I'm going to do what I can. Never, I'm going to do what I can with other people. I'm going to do what I can and be like, okay, well, I tried. That's just, I was looking at my phone for a moment because I read this on a Substack by Jamila Bradley. Joy is a strategy. The white leftist struggle with spirit. And I will give y'all the link. It's such a good read because she talks about how in other resistance movements, particularly resistance movements that have impacted people of color, queer people of color, there has to be something outside of your present circumstances that keeps you going. It can't all be logic. It can't all be efficiency. It can't all be rationale because that's not how humans function. Like rationale wasn't what got us here. Justifying bad stuff is what got us here. And divorcing
Which is
yourself.
illogical.
Yeah. Divorcing yourself from like the feeling of it is what got us here. That's not going to be the solution out of this. And so it's slower to get people to understand that. And it's one of the things, talking about rest as resistance, it's one of the things that I don't want to say struggling with, but I'm wrestling with is the idea that in amidst so much urgency, I as a single human being cannot fix every single thing that like urgent thing that is happening right now. How do I make peace with my limitations, make peace with my finite capacity, and how do I work with other people on those issues in a way that I can sustain? Because if I get to a place where I am so burned out on helping, on caring, on giving, I don't want to do it anymore. How is that helpful? I think a lot of people get so the action is present now that they're not. I hope I say this in a way that people understand, don't like intentionally misunderstand. How do I get everything done now so that I don't feel uncomfortable in the future is where a lot of people are coming from. And my approach is I know that these issues are decades long in solution. Not because I want them to be, not because the people suffering from these want them to be, but because of the power structures that we're coming up against. How can I both help now and be ready to help in the future? That's a different pace. And I know I'm not tiptoeing here. I'm trying to use like a scalpel. I know that there are people who hear rest as resistance means rest that bypasses what's happening right now. They hear an opt out. They hear, "Ooh, I'm gonna take a nap, girl. I don't have to engage with what's going on right now. I can just, what was that baby's name? Rip Van Winkle, the one who fell asleep and like woke up 5 or 10 years later. I could just like be on snooze mode the whole time. It's like that's not the point. Like do what you need to do your inner work right now. And not right now, but do your focus on like how you want to move forward with the changes that are going to be here 10, 20, 30 years from now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the
And
perfect.
okay, sorry.
No,
And
no.
localize it. Please localize it. Like that is where one you're going to have the most impact and the thing that you can touch and show up to. My friend Wani Torres, just low key, I'm really hoping that she becomes president if we still have the United States. Or whatever the new country is going to be called. I hope she becomes president or at least chief of staff to a president. She's so freaking brilliant. But I remember this quote that she told me in like 2020, when they go low, we go local. Where is your energy, attention, and time most going to benefit you, this cause? It's locally. How can you show up there? And a lot of times people think local isn't enough because these big things are happening on a federal level. But when our cities and our states are like, nah, there's power there. So anyways, go ahead, Becky.
Well, because this is a perfect place to bring up something I want, that my left turn, but it's not a left turn now, which is
Well,
you
can I
mentioned.
say something real quick before you veer yourself a little bit? Well, I just want to point out that like even that idea of like people thinking that rest is bypassing the work,
Mm-hmm.
that's still operating within it has to be one or the other thing instead of looking at rest as part of the process
Mm-hmm.
of doing the right.
Yeah.
And so I want to make that clear. Like rest is part of the process. Rest is part
Yeah.
of the work. It's not in and it's not antithetical to the work. It's
It's not
part
at
of the work.
all. And when people think that, I always like to kind of agitate a little bit and ask, where did you learn that from? Who benefits from you being unrested?
Hmm.
Where has that ever, like, who's lying to you about the fact that they pick themselves up by their bootstraps and like they just hustled it out? Not that their daddy gave them an emerald mine,
Well,
excuse me.
that's exactly where I wanna go, because
Mhm.
and we have to take an intersectional approach to this conversation that you're talking about around bypassing and it
Mhm.
being part of the work and all that, because there's a lot of discourse going on threads where I hang out, and I'm sure everywhere, about the idea of rest as resistance, and yet again, white women coming in and trying to co-opt that concept and use that
Mhm.
concept, and there's we have to look at privilege, right? And oppression, and who needs rest and how much rest.
Yeah.
Because yes, I'm a woman. I need rest. I have a fight and I've been fighting. But my fight looks very different. How
Mhm.
long have I been fighting? How long have my ancestors been fighting? What is the ancestral trauma that I've inherited? What is,
Hmm.
that epigenetic piece of this? The daily, what do I face and not face? That part around the extra weight and burden that certain people have to carry that other people don't, based on privilege, that causes a true need for more rest. It's fucking exhausting to have to spend every moment of every day with every interaction having to evaluate harm. And if I'm not having to do that with every interaction, every moment, every day, I have a little less need for rest, right? And I think it's just so important that we acknowledge too, like, because I think too often white women here, rest is resistant. I'm a good white liberal and I'm part of the resistance
Mhm.
because I went to a protest. I need to take a nap, right? Like,
Mhm.
and not to belittle like napping. We all need to stop. But you can't just show up and say, as a white woman, but rest is resistance. And so I'm part of the resistance because I'm at home napping all day. Really? Are you part of the
Yeah.
resistance? Are you showing up, or are you bypassing your responsibility here? Because I do think in certain cases that rest is resistance can be bypassing if you're not looking at it through that lens of, what are my overlapping identities? Where do I have privilege and where do I not? And am
Mhm.
I leaning into that privilege a little bit by saying, I'm just going to take a nap and excuse
Yeah.
myself from, because it doesn't
Yeah.
really, it's affecting me if it does, nothing happens, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, what are your thoughts about that? Because that's a big discourse I'm noticing lately around white women suddenly wanting to be a part of the resistance by resting.
I think that's something that I'm wrestling with in general because like, there's the intersectional lens of it. And also, you might be in a season in your life where there's chronic health issues, divorces, deaths in families, all these other types of things that are impacting you. And so I think when I think about rest as resistance, it's an opportunity to evaluate like where you are and how much capacity you have to give at this point, right? For anybody. And then I think about like based off of that capacity, how am I showing up? And I think where a lot of hashtag well-meaning white women get messed up is the idea that like rest is like a pass. Like, well, I really do need to like rest. And it's not because of I'm really going through something or health or anything like that. It's to avoid. And so where I am what I'm trying to untangle for myself personally and so that I can communicate is knowing the difference between when you are resting to avoid and when you are resting to sustain and what that looks like. Because I think I know that there are a lot of people who don't want to do the uncomfortable work of being called out, showing up, putting your body in places that might be unsafe or dangerous, even if it's just the perception of not being in a safe place, even if it's the perception of danger. in an interpersonal situation, right? Like Taina, you said at work and realizing, oh, someone is not safe after I said this. There are people who feel that shame so fast they lock up and they're like unsafe, 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 right? I do think it's interesting the people that I've seen who've said like, oh girl, I'm resting. I'm out on this one. And it was like, you were never showing up anything before. What are you talking about? You rested? No, you wasn't.
You've been resting.
You've been resting, babes. You've been out. And so like, how can we better define one, rest. Two, how do we better define the difference between when we're doing it to avoid something with the intention to avoid something and when we're doing it to survive and sustain? And I think it's a fine line because sometimes there are going to be moments in life when things are incredibly urgent on a global, national, regional scale, right? And you ain't got it. You don't have the capacity for it. And so, like, I'm not going to guilt or shame you if you say, I can't show up for that right now. Okay. For me, and sometimes when I hear that type of reaction, Becky, it still feels like there's like that shame piece to like, wake up, bitches. Like, we've got work to do, which is like, great. And at the same time, like, no one's going to be shamed into positive action. Like most people don't. Shame is like not a sustainable motivator. It
For
might
sure.
like it
For
might
sure.
get you up, it might get you out for a second, but it's not gonna sustain anything. So like, and at the same time when you're saying this, and I'm saying all this to say like I don't have a clear answer.
Well,
I
but I
remember
love what you said
going to
about discomfort, about like
yeah.
our avoidance, because I think it goes back to what we were talking about with white women. And white women have been the privilege that we hold
Mhm.
allows us to move through life with very little discomfort. And that can be
Yeah.
so hard for white women to hear because we think we do move through life with a lot of discomfort. And I'm not saying there isn't discomfort. I have been sexually assaulted. I know the discomforts of living in a world with men very, very well. I also know, especially the more that I learn and I surround myself with people with different lived experiences, that I also, my proximity to whiteness and the white male need to protect white women, I also know the great deal of privilege that I hold, and that has allowed me to avoid so much discomfort. I've had discomfort, but I also know there's so much discomfort I have avoided that I don't realize that for the longest time, I didn't realize I had been avoiding. So my discomfort felt very real until I saw, shit, you mean there's these other women who are dealing with all these other things on top of that same discomfort I've been dealing
Yeah.
with? That discomfort alone felt so fucking heavy. How are they dealing with this on top of that, right? So like
Mhm.
that, and we don't know how to be in discomfort. It's awful
Yeah.
because we don't have to very much, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's that key difference where because we've never had to, we don't know how to be with it. And when it comes up, we have the privilege to opt out.
Yeah.
And so, like, I get you. I don't want to shame people, but I also think white women need to sit with some of this and think about it because I
Yeah.
have been guilty of some of this propaganda around rest as resistance. I try to mostly do that for clients of mine who are Black women, who are queer women, but I've also used it with white women and needing to do a little more like through this lens of intersectionality we need to start getting real honest with ourselves as white women. How much rest do I actually need? Yes, I need rest. I'm not saying we don't, but my needs are probably different because also I don't have 400 years of ancestral trauma. I
Yeah.
don't, and again, like that way
And
we
I
move
I
around the world.
think also like okay, so that's a question that has come up so many times. It's like, well, like, am I resting too much? Am I doing too much? How much rest do like I actually need? That's the answer between you and your body. I can't answer that for you. So my approach is less like, and I think it's also because like my approach is less, I'm not going to police these folks because my approach is based off of like who's showing up. More than likely, the people who are comfortable with stopping at like, oh, rest is resistance, and I'm gonna rest my ass right over here, and y'all do what you got to do over there, and I'm fine over there. They're never gonna listen to me anyways, and I don't. My work probably isn't for them. They stop at that like, oh, I get a pass. I feel like a lot of times, and I have to qualify more. I have to be better about qualifying because then people do hear that and think like, oh, it's easy street for people who don't take breaks for people who like executive directors of nonprofits who are also impacted by the cause that they're trying to fix with their nonprofit
Yeah.
and feel like I can't stop. It's for the people who are so afraid to take their foot off of the gas because they think everything will fall apart without them that need these breaks. Everybody needs rest. Rest is a right, is a necessity. I'm not the radical joy police. I'm not gonna tell somebody like,
Yeah.
girl, you don't, because I don't know your individual
You're resting
situation.
the wrong way.
Yeah, I don't know your individual situation, right? And rest is so many things. Rest is socializing with your friends. Rest is taking a walk in the park. It's
Yeah.
not just
Yeah.
sleeping. So I'm not going to police what an individual person needs, but I'm going to talk to the people who are showing up and the people who like gently, lovingly have put so much blood, sweat, and tears into stuff already that like, yo, you can take a break. You can take a long break if you want. You can take a short break if you want. Like, I'm not here to judge which direction you go on that, but that is available to you. Because when I hear the like, you don't need that much, it feels like a pendulum swing and it still doesn't. The point is to work to live in a world where people can get what they need. I
Yeah.
can't tell you what you need. Even as a white lady, I can't say, girl, you only need 8 hours and then I need you back in these streets like picketing or something like
Yeah.
that. I can't do
I'll
that.
say it then.
You can.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
I think,
I can't
well, I
do that.
think,
Go ahead, Tanya.
yeah. No, I was gonna say, I think that brings up, a really good point that like a lot of times when people hear rest, they think you're not doing anything. That it's the absence of doing things. And there's so many different ways to rest, right? There's creative rest, right? Like if you're a
Yeah.
writer or a painter or a poet, like
Mhm.
engaging in some of those creative activities can feel really restful for you. That doesn't mean that you're not doing something. It means that you're filling yourself up with something that's going to help you thrive in the future, right? Rest is not always the absence of activity. It's leaning into the things that help you feel like a whole human being. So when you engage with the world outside of yourself, you're better equipped and you're better able to sustain that engagement. I
Can
want
I
to
just
say,
quickly
just,
Can I say
yeah,
one quick,
yeah,
just only
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
related. I just love thinking of rest as short for restorative, because
Mhm.
then that changes it to anything that feels restorative, like you were saying, that brings you back to
yeah,
yourself. So that does exactly, can look like anything. Sometimes it can be really hard things too. Like I
yeah.
think it can be exercising when you don't feel like it, or moving your
Therapy.
body when you don't feel like it because
Yeah.
it brings you back to you. So anyway, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Therapy is a form of rest, right? It's a type of emotional rest, like being able to like come back to yourself. Anyway, as we're wrapping up, like I want to say, like, I'm glad you brought up this concept of intersectionality when it comes to a concept like rest, because because I think a lot of times when people hear intersectionality, right, they think because we exist in a binary world where things are mutually exclusive and there's this rugged individualism where it's like, if it's not me, it's you,
Mhm.
right? Where things are so opposing. When they hear intersectionality and they think, oh, well, that means this person's getting something, which means I'm not getting what I need. But the beauty about intersectionality is that it's dynamic, it's contextual. You getting what you need does not invalidate the fact that somebody else also might need something different and still has their needs. And them getting their needs met doesn't invalidate the fact that you also have needs that you need to get met. And that is missing in a lot of conversations about intersectionality because of the way that conservatives, the right, the quote unquote anti woke agenda, right? Whatever you want to call it, has co opted intersectionality and framed the conversation around it to be so far from what it originally came from. And so if your understanding of intersectionality is like, oh, it's only about Black people, or it's only about white women, or excuse me, only about Black women, then you have missed the point, right? Like you have been misinformed about what intersectionality is, because it's really about how all of us exist in a way where these intersections create gaps in us being
Mhm.
able to get our needs met, regardless
Yeah.
of your race, your gender, your sexuality, like how you identify and how others perceive you in the world.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been talking about more is rest equity and how like We've created laws in this country about when people are allowed to rest at work. And I'm in Texas. Our governor, don't even get me started, voted on a
Good
law
old Governor
last
Abbott.
girl. Voted on a law last year that limited the amount of water and water breaks that construction workers and people who work outside can take in Texas. So like
That's
when we have this
Voldemort level behavior.
it's evil. It's just evil. When we have these conversations around rest and we have these conversations around an intersectionality, talking about rest from an equity lens, from to Becky's point, talking about it from a place of how do we help those who have probably never felt that, have never felt restful or restored? How does that work of reclamation tie into this? And that's, I think, where like the starting point for my work is how to help you like reclaim yourself and all of this in a machine that's gonna keep grinding, right? But how can we stop grinding ourselves?
Mm,
This was such a
That's
good
a
combo.
great way.
I was like, we could talk forever. You're right. We could have you
Mhm.
back. There's so much, like, talking about the different kinds of rest was something I wanted to get into, and because you have a thing about like actual buckets of rest, but we don't have time, and that was amazing. And I want this to be required listening, viewing for white women, especially who are still in some of that, because I think so much of the talk around the defensiveness. And I know there's parts of this that many white women who are still earlier in their learning journey and their unlearning journey and their reclamation journey, whatever, they need that. They need to hear some of this. I just think it's so important. But also, I'm sure, for Black women to also hear and remember rest. Rest is resistance. Thank
Yeah.
you for being here, Joy.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you have not checked out Jordan's podcast, it's amazing. Great.
Rest lab.
What Becky and I were just talking about, you have such a great podcast voice. It's so soothing. And the
I put
fact
my
that it's
NPR
about
voice
rest.
on.
You do a great job of it. They should have
Yeah.
hired you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. The fact
Yeah,
that
so
it's
we'll
about
link it in the
rest
show
too
notes.
is like,
Good.
You're like a
I'm
big
glad.
warm hug.
Yeah.
We'll put it in the show notes, Rest Lab, and your Substack as well. So
Perfect.
thank you.
Thank y'all for having me.
Thanks for listening to Messy Liberation.
Will you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen?
I know people say that all the time, and if you're like me, often you just go on to the next podcast, but truly, taking that moment to do that will really help us reach a wider audience.
Thank you so much for your support and for listening today.
Until next time.